Hello, welcome to another Britain's Hidden History, the history they don't teach you in school. I'm Ross, and today we're going to be talking about mounds. Yeah, those big lumps of mud and dirt, and whatever else is inside them. I might not have thought about them very much, but you might be surprised there's more to them, and they can tell us a lot. Now, there's three broad categories of mounds I want to talk about. The first one is a sort of treasure mounds. And these are very much, you might put your treasure or sacred items, the sort of things we talk about when we talk about Towing Aglow. The Towing Aglow, the hill, the glowing hill. The second one are burial mounds, of which there's various types, and they can give you a lot of clues about history. And then the third type are the special ones, which you might not be aware of. And they're what we call star mounds. Okay, so if I can get the technology all working funky dunky today, let's get an idea. Okay, so this is the basic structure of a treasure mound. Now, usually, as you see, you've got the natural hill here, and then you build your mound on top of it, and in the middle of the mound, you've got your treasure chamber, which you might have a little entrance to that way, or you just seal it up completely, depending on your use. Now, you might think, why on earth would you put your treasure on the top of a hill? It must be the last place. Everyone can see it for miles. It's not at all hidden. Right. Well, the first reason is to do with the climate. And that's if you compare it with, say, ancient Egypt, which is very dry. You could bury things underground and they last a long time with no real damage. Now, if you tried that in Britain, or in Wales particularly, it's going to get very damp very soon and everything will rot. So it's okay to hide gold and, coins and that kind of stuff underground. But if you've got something that's perishable in any way whatsoever, it needs to be in a dry environment. So what you would do, build your mound on the top of the hill. You need the height. The height is to your advantage. This is, so there you make a small a chamber, a room, where you want to put your goodies, like I say, might be accessible. And then the key is at the bottom of the floor, you make a hole like a sink. And it's literally a sink hole. And from this, if you can see my cursor keeps disappearing, you have these drainage paths at a nice shallow angle. Don't want them too steep. I've drawn them a bit too steep there. This particular angle they use, it's very clever. And they stuff these very narrow, tunnels with special stones that no moss or anything grows. They don't clog up, so they can last a long time. The one in Towing Aglow, for example, when the stones are analysed, there's 3 different types of stones coming as far away as Cornwall, and mixed together, it seems no moss or anything can grow. Because clearly, you don't want your drainage tunnel clogging up, which it would do over time. And it comes down into a sort of saucer situation filled with stones, so the water doesn't come gushing out, destroying the mound. It slowly fills the saucer, and then will seep out and dribble down the edges. So that's the treasure mound. The other thing about it being on top of the hill, of course, is that if anyone's trying to do anything to it nefarious, steal from it or anything, from all around people can see you trying to get to their treasure mound. It makes it much easier to defend, or at least see from a surprise attack. And if it's someone wants to make a more concerted attack, then you could defend the top of the hill. Quite often you find treasure mines on the top of a hill that would also be used as a hill fort. So something. Now, next to come on to burial mounds. As you can see, I've gone crazy with the budgets. I've got a lovely new camera, some new kit, and this fantastic new display, which took me ages with a marker pen and a piece of paper. And I've copied these images from Artorius Rex book, which goes into this in more detail. Now, the categories, if you go before 200 AD, when you really start to get more Christian influences, the standard burial mound is pretty much a big lump. Not always. This is the kind of thing you look to see. But even here, there's some subtlety involved. Because what you will notice, particularly with the ones you find in Wales, and I would suggest the ones in England are related, such as Sutton Hoo, most noticeably. You'll find that some of the ones, and we'll see some pictures in a second, are actually boat-shaped. And the idea is, I don't know, whether it's to steer the person off into their heaven, whatever it is, the shape is a boat. And the person you're looking for, the actual burial site, if you look at an ancient boat, they like this, and then hanging over the back right side is a massive oar, which the helmsman would use to steer the ship. They sort of be in charge of the ship, really. Everyone's rowing away, or the sail. The helmsman is the guide, and that's the spot. So when we're looking at these big boat-shaped mounds, as we'll see, that's the place we would actually expect to find the body. Alright, so what they do is on a hill. Another clue is the orientation. They're always done in east-west, which ties in what became later Christian traditions. And the marker stones on the east side, and that quite often could be a marker stone for other people to be buried, lesser nobles, and also a marker to show you the way to the mound. And some of the big hills will have more than one of these. Alright, then what happened then, the Christian influence starts to come in, and you'll see here the church appears next to the mound. Alright, and it's usually a sort of southwest direction. And that goes on between about 200 and 450 AD. We'll see a church, the mound for the main person, the king's burial mound, and on the other side you'll see a marker post for the burial mound of lesser nobles and other people. So that's you'll see a good example of that in a second as well. The third one over time is that the Christian influence comes in, and this is where you really start to see the pattern emerging in the British kings, particularly in Wales, the ones I know most about. What would happen there, it's not like the sort of current model that we have, where you wait for the king or queen to die and then there's a natural inheritance. What would happen in those days, and it has happened sometimes with the English throne as well, but with the British throne, you reach a certain age and you think, right, I don't want to be doing this anymore. I also want to go to heaven, because by this stage more the ideas of purgatory, you have to spend a lot of time waiting for a judgment if you go to heaven or hell, and there's damnation, there's sin, there's all sorts of things, and what you really wanted to do was a fast route straight to heaven. And one of the ways you could do this, especially if you're a king, was to grant a large piece of land, a productive piece of land, and if you also donated the money for a church to be built as well, you're pretty much guaranteed to be a saint. Slightly different to the idea we might have of a saint now. But they were actually cleared of all their sins, because one of the things you would do, say you get to 70, 80 years old, say, right, that's it, I'm handing on all the temporal duties of being a king, and I get baptized, all my sins are gone, I start with a clean sheet, and I will live a pure existence, which is a lot easier to do when you're retired and not a king. For example, we see the example of Tudrig, the grandfather of Arthur, who became the hermit king, and he went to live more or less as a hermit to have his sins absolved, and then he becomes a saint upon death. And if you notice around South Wales, you'll see all sorts of saints' names, and this is the usual process. So, as it's mentioned on there, the king is then buried in the north wall, which is where the altar would be. So the idea is, if I'm giving a sermon, I'm speaking for God, and on my right hand here, this is where the dignitary or the builder of the church would be buried on the right hand of God. And again, you've got the situation, as I mentioned, the lesser nobles and the marker stones. So that's the classic you'll see in later churches. And then, of course, you have the situation of religious wars, where everything starts to get ruined, and the warring with the Saxons, all this kind of stuff. And you have a slightly different arrangement, which you can also see throughout South Wales, and I'm sure across England and other places. The church, and on the west-hand side, then you've got the burial mound. All right? So this is very much covering the way in which burial mounds. So what you can do from that, you can work out some of the dates. So here's one of the most famous ones. This is Tumbalu, and this is where Baron ap Kerry is buried, although I have done some research. There might be, there seems to be more than one burial mound up there. And it's a really commanding view. This would also be a hill fort as well. And this is one of the differences between the native British forts and, invader forts, things that are called Roman or Norman. They'd be down flat on the plains trying to subdue the people. Whereas the native forts would be on high ground where you can see enemies coming, and you form a refuge place and a defensive position. So there's Tumbalu, very high and very impressive. Now, the other one which I want to show you, which is interesting this, because there's one called the Mind, M-Y-N-D, or Mound. And this is another high place with a mound in Caerleon, or Caerleon, where the famous Roman fort is reputed to be. So what was interesting about this one? Now, this is up in Shropshire, which is on the English side of the Severn, further north. And okay, up until only a few hundred years ago, this was still part of Wales. But anyway, moving along from that. What was also interesting here, I found, is Caer Caradoc. By the way, Caer is their kind of a North Walian pronunciation, perhaps. If you listen to South Walians, they say Cardiff, and that historically is correct. It's not a bizarre accent. That's where the capital is, and Caer is how you say it, okay? So Caer Caradoc is also next to this in Shropshire, which is interesting because you've also got the main burial site of Caradoc that we're going to see in a minute. And I also noticed they're classified as Marilyn's, which, as my Auntie Marilyn, my aunt is called Marilyn. Hello, Auntie Marilyn. I give them a quick mention. What it means is the drop or the height of the hill from whatever surface level, so not necessarily above sea level, it's 150 metres. That's why I read it anyway. Gives you a rough idea. Very dramatic, very stunning here. So what we then have to look at is the boat-shaped burial mounds, and we've got a couple of examples. And if I can just use the magic of technology here. And hopefully, here we go. There we go. This is at a place on the South Wales coast, Vale of Glamorgan. This is called Nash Point. And that area there, which is the unimposing view of Kerry Longsword's boat-shaped mound. And if you see it, we're going to get some drones and do some proper vertical pictures so you can more clearly see the boat shape. Now, it's tragically been neglected and not as impressive as it used to be, but you can still see the difference in the type of soil is creating different vegetation to be grown. And thank goodness, at least the council or whoever is in charge actually does mow around it and doesn't just flatten it off. So it is still there. For how much longer, I don't know, because Welsh monuments are disappearing rapidly, very rapidly, more rapidly than if it was just by accident, in my view. So I don't know what's going on. But there we are, Kerry Longswords. And just down the coast from there, you've got Porth Kerry, which is the port of Kerry. So he's there with a commanding position overlooking the sea. Those little rough Welsh boys walking around. And he's guarding the entrances. So this is his key spot. And you see some of our group from the Britain's Hidden History group. If you try and get in touch, we do trips and you can come and see. And we're now up on Mynyddig the Gaea, which is Fortress Mountain, with Steve from the group. And this massive area, the whole of the brownish yellowy grass there, it's like a drainage area. This is kind of the opposite in many ways to when we talked about the treasure mound draining through. Here it's a big collection point because further down the hill is where there's a church. And hopefully you can see this. The point is that where we're standing now is the helmsman's position. It's the back right corner of the boat. And this path, tragically, has been cut through this. This hill, this area, Caradoc, in case you're not aware, is the one who led the striking against the Romans and also one of the first Christian rulers in the world. Now see, there's some of the boat-shaped mound on the other side of the path as well. And I've been, on good authority, been told that the path used to go all the way around the boat-shaped mound. But for whatever reasons, lazy farmer or just making the path a bit easier, it now cuts through the mound. What should be one of the most sacrosanct sites in the whole of Wales. The great burial site of the ancient kings. It's like the site of the kings for our old for Britain. It's like the Valley of the Kings to the British. So it's quite tragic. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is a couple more pictures here to give more idea. Hope this is working. Alright, so here's now some examples. This is a place called Ystrad Owen, or Ystrad Owain, who was a Welsh ruler, British king. And you can tell from the layout here the sort of era where we've got the church and we've got this giant mound. So it's a little bit later. The first two we saw, Caradoc, he was fighting against Roman invasion, the Claudian invasion. So we're talking about 1st century. And it's supposed to be 51 AD when he was taken to Rome as a captive. after being betrayed. And now we're moving further forward to Owain. And you do wonder how many people notice this mound right by the church and know this is where King Owain, his burial mound is. Now what's slightly interesting, it's a bit different as well on these mounds. You'll notice they're not just a big hump shape, and this is quite important. They have the depression in the middle, whether it's the boat, or in this case, more circular. If those trees weren't there, it would be good to have a proper look to see if this might be boat-shaped as well. It wouldn't be a big surprise, although this is now Christian, so it's less likely. So there's a burial mound at Ystrad Owen. That's near Cowbridge in Glamorgan, if you're looking to go there. As you can see, it's a beautiful site. So then we move on to the later stages, where they're no longer being buried in the mound. They're now being buried in the church, like I was saying, on the right hand of God, in the north wall. And this is the one I mentioned earlier. This is Tudrig the Martyr, and it used to be called, apparently, Merthyr Tudrig, because Merthyr is the martyr. It's also got some other meanings. And Merthyr Tydfil might mean something completely different to what's being told, but that's for another video, all right? Come back for that one. Anyway, so Tudrig handed over and went on to live for a long time, and the reason why he's particularly famous, he went to live a little bit further up the river, Tintern, and the story goes that there was a Saxon invasion, although some people say it was a Wessex invasion, and the Wessex kingdom were not Saxons. That's another issue. Where it came into Wales and were driven out by his son Meirig, who was in charge of the armies, and he drove them back and back and back, and they were trying to escape across the ford, which happened to be where Tudrig was a hermit. So he grabbed his armour, spoke to his people, there's a couple of hundred of them, and they could block the ford long enough for the main army to come and destroy the invading army. But Tudrig, in the battle, took a mortal wound, and as prophesied, he was 3 days in the dying process, and he got as far as Mathen, place of the king, and that's where he eventually became buried. And that's this thing I was telling you about, where he bequeaths the land and becomes a saint, and this is his burial place, and it's still named after him to this day. So there's some good examples there, and people say there's no evidence. It's it's everywhere. Never mind the written and the stones you can read. The mounds are quite important by themselves. Now they come on to a different type of mound now, and this in many ways is the most interesting of the three types. Now this, we're not 100% sure, but this does seem to be what we called the Monkey Tump when I was a boy. This photograph was taken at the 40s, and I do apologise for getting the name of the person from the CF58, it's the postcode, group who sent me this picture, and I'll try and add it when I find the name again. This is not water, it's grass. I know it looks, that's just the colouring of the picture, but you can see by the curves it's actually fields. By the 70s, of course, this has got completely built on, and it looks more like that. And I took this picture last night. That's exactly what it looks like now, and you can see the houses went all the way around it. Thank goodness they didn't level it or build over it. And when I was a boy, this was the place. I played there every day. There's a group of us for years, hide and seek and running around and chasing all sorts. It was the best playground. But it seems today that children don't go up there so much. I think it's partly a bit more protected now. The fence has appeared. I don't think I would have stopped this for long. And it's a mound. What's doing far more harm than any children playing is all these trees that were planted on it. And you can see in that picture in the 40s, they were planted probably in the 30s and 40s. And they do terrible damage. The roots, anything. Anyway, and this is the area. And this is the amusing bit, because it's the official sign went up some years ago. Tomen a Clouth. This Norman castle mound is protected as a monument of national importance. Blah, blah, blah. Nothing can be Welsh. Nothing can be British. Everything has to be Roman or Norman or even Viking. And the Vikings never even in Wales, so worked that one out. And I just thought it was quite amusing, because Tomen a Clouth, probably modern Welsh, I like my old dictionaries. This one is 1777, and did make me laugh, because if you look up Tomen, if you can see it there, yeah, it's dunghill. So I thought dunghill was quite amusing, and I looked up clouth in Old Welsh as well, which is, yeah, I can't see what's on the screen, hopefully you can see that, which is a mud wall. So dunghill and mud wall. This is a Welsh description of a Motte and Bailey castle, apparently. But of course it's none of those things. It'd be the world's worst castle. It's the wrong size, it's the wrong place, and the outer banks make it easier for the attackers than the defenders. And the other thing, of course, if it was a castle and it was Norman era, you'd expect at least some archaeology, even just holes where the wooden posts went, or some crockery, something. But mysteriously vanished, as has all trace of Normans in this area, because they didn't come to this area as such. So let's think what this mound could be. And this is where you can start to do a bit of thinking and investigating. Now, as I become more and more involved with the burial mounds, what struck me was, just up the road, we have a St. Illtyd's church in the parish of Llantwit Vardra. It's a rather annoying name, and it's a little bit insulting when you think about it. It might remind you of a place called Llantwit Major. Same thing's being done. The name Llan is church, and it should be Llan Illtyd. Illtyd being the cousin of Arthur, royal family. They're a different idea about people in charge of the church in those days, in British Christianity. They got married, they had children, they passed it down. It was hereditary titles, being head of the church, or running a church even. So this should be the Church of Illtyd, Llan Illtyd Vardra, as it should be Llan Illtyd Major, or whatever you want to call it, down on the south coast. Llan Illtyd Fawr in Welsh. And the point of this is, it's been translated to Llan Twit. So what on earth is twit meant to mean? It's the Church of the Twit. So there you go. I don't think there's any excuse for that. I don't know, is it meant to be a slap in the face or something? Very, very strange. Llan Twit. Anyway, the point of this church is it's very close to the what we used to call the Monkey Tump. That's that mound that I used to play on. And we called it Monkey Tump, we thought, because we're monkeys and we're climbing on the trees and the mounds. And it's a tump, which is Welsh for a mound. We knew that much. But if you look at the history, other places, monkey can be a derivation from mynach. A mynach is the word for monks or holy. So it could be related to the church. So I thought I'd pop up there last night, take some pictures to show this. But the more you look at it, oh, by the way, there's the local school where they have got it right. Llan Illtyd, although it's spelt with a U, but spelling doesn't really matter too much. Llan Illtyd Vardrev. So you got Drev is town. I'm not too sure what Ver means. I should look it up. And in the background, you can see the Garth Mountain, which is really what I want to talk about the third type of mounds we're coming on to. Now this, you can see the gravestones in the front here. This is the view of the Garth Mountain, Garth. Garth. Few different ideas about why it's called Garth. The one I tend to go with is Arth. I know Arthur, I've got the Arthur things, but I think this is to do with being a buttress or a defence. And the Garth is part of the defences. And you see my article, I'll do a video on Fortress Glamorgan. Because you've got Penarth, the town down on the south coast, the head of Arth. Some people think it's the head of Arthur. I tend to think it's the head of the defences. And if you'd like to beacon down on there to say you've been attacked by sea, you can see it up on the Garth. Because one of the things to remember about the whole South Wales coast, it's not actually the sea. It's on the River Severn. And it's a short hop for an invasion across from England. So that's why monitoring that and guarding all the inlets and bays coming into South Wales is so important. So what you notice here is these three mounds on the Garth. I grew up here. Only a couple of years I've realised the significance. I don't think anyone thinks about them. Get this thing about round barrows and no one really thinks about it, or possibly burial mounds. Far more likely, if you look at them, this if you get the book The Discovery of the Ark of the Covenant by Wilson and Blackett, you can see in there how they describe how this is the belt of Orion. Those three stars, like the same way the three pyramids are supposed to represent this belt of Orion, the constellation Orion. That's the case here. The three mounds are the belt of Orion. This is part of the constellations. Because what you have in South Wales is amazing. You have a star map covering almost the whole of South Wales. It's huge. It's incredibly impressive. And we're mapping all of it out. And the more work we do, the more you can see not just constellations, but individual stars appearing. And they're represented by these kind of round mounds. Another reason why they're on top of the hills. The natural geography. I'm also in a future video going to talk about this clump of trees here. There's a lot more to that than meets the eye. But for now, we're going to talk about the line of 3. So if that's the belt of Orion, the point is, the Monkey Tump, which I thought might be connected with the church, is actually mentioned in that book, Discovery of the Ark of the Covenant. I couldn't believe it. Tonteg, the name of the village. First I've ever seen it in a book anywhere. This is the situation from these trees on the left. I've gone a little bit higher up from the Monkey Tump because the houses mean you can't quite directly see the Garth. But if you come a little bit higher up the village, you can look across. The trees on the left here are actually the ones on the Monkey Tump. Alright, these houses, all I've done is come the other side of the houses. I've moved about 60 yards, not even 100 yards. And there's the Garth in the background. I don't live in this part anymore, but I can see those out my window every morning. Reminds me to get going with this project. It's important. So those 3 are the belt of Orion. And this one down here, you'll see this, I'll show the constellation in a second, is part of the constellation. And it's known as, the right knee of the giant, or the lower sword of the giant, or the lower sword of Orion, which is a lot more impressive than, what was the translation we got? The dunghill and dirt ditch. Right, so there, just to quickly give you an idea, come on. So there's the belt of Orion. You see Orion's the archer. There's the bow. There's the body. There's his arm twanging the arrows. His skirts or whatever he's wearing. And the sword is said to come here. And what we have here is the lower sword. And that, you can't quite... That's frustrating. There's another star further down. But I would say from the position, pretty certainly, this is the mound in Tonteg known as the Monkey Tump. It fits there. Now, one of the things we now have someone's pretty qualified astronomer and looking at more of these and looking at the alignments. And not only is it the 3 as the belt of Orion, it aligns as well. And you can see where it aligns in future videos. And it's all to do with equinox of the sun and solstice. It's mind-blowing. The more you look into it, the bigger it gets. I'll put a video together as well showing, because just across the valley, so if you look one way, you see the Garth from my old house. You could see the other way up to Eglwysillin, and that goes then over to up to Gelligaer Common up the top there, and St Genevieve. And St Genevieve, they say it's named after St Kenneth, except there is no St Kenneth. It ties in with, like, the Welsh Parliament. Do you know what it's called? It's the Senedd. And the St Genevieve was a sort of a head, an important centre. Anyway, up on top of there is the description of where the pole star is, Polaris. And one of the ways we know this is through the book, the Mabinogi. Now, you might have heard the Mabinogion, which is a collection of children's sort of stories and fairy tales, and people think, it's just mythical nonsense fairy tales to amuse children. Actually, it's packed with astrological information. This is why it doesn't make sense, a lot of it. This is why some of it's weird. She's talking about planets and stars and where things are. What it is, if you know how to do it, if you know the key, it's the key to understanding this massive star map. Like the Nazda star map in Central America, only much more impressive. And I'll just say a little bit more on that before we finish. Because we went up there with Tim about 5-6 months ago. Actually, not even that long ago. I think it was middle of winter. It's a lousy day, raining. Tim had some sort of cold. Maybe he had this virus because he was ill and I was ill. We both got better, but I think it might have been that. So probably about January time. And then we went over to look for the Mound, and there's a few things up there to see up on the common. And what was remarkable, in that case, they'd used standing stones. And we got other ones. We got the Lion Stone, which is where Leo is, the star sign Leo. So much I want to stop there. I'll keep the video shorter, but it's so much. Look out for more on star mounds, right? In many ways, it's the most exciting part, because how the heck did they do this? Anyway, got up to Polaris. And Tim's in the car making a call, stop the car, and he's not feeling very well. I run out, and I've had a look. I haven't taken many pictures. I've got a few because it's raining and it's cold. And then I come back in. I said, Tim, what's going on? He said, oh, yeah, I know. He said, there's 2 stones. I said, no, I said, there's 3. There's 3 stones. 2 big ones, 1 small one. I said, oh, maybe they're making some sort of arrow or something and they're pointing. Because up from there, you've got views all around. It's amazing, right? You can see the Garth, obviously, and there's other things you can see. And I was trying to work out where all the star signs were. I thought maybe it's an arrow or a pointing. But then if you go and check Polaris, I came back in the evening to get some more information. I don't know a lot about astronomy. Polaris is 3 stars. 2 bright, 1 less bright. And I was thinking, how the heck did they know that? And how long have those stones been there? I tell you, when you get into the stones and the star mounds and see the amount of research that's been done and how this map just pans out all across Wales, and there's so much in there. It's a whole massive subject by itself. So, one person I must mention as well. When I was taking those photographs up by the church, I bumped into someone there out for a walk called Catherine, who was very nice, very friendly, and we had a good chat about all this stuff. And she said she'd look in and look out for the videos. So, there you go. I hope you do, and it's very nice to meet you. So, good luck to everyone. Please, next time you see a lump on the hill, have a little think about it. Think, is it a burial mound? Is it a star mound? Is it a treasure mound? What is it? What's it doing there? Don't go destroying them. I'll tell you now, they very few treasure, okay? If any, and there's only a few. Most of them are star mounds, and my guess is they just be solid earth, and they're markers, and it's a map. So try and work out what constellation you're looking at. I will show you more of these, because it just gets mind-blowing. So until the next time, Heddwch.